Hi everyone, we're going to get started now. Jeanie is going to be joining via Zoom, so hopefully her head, there she is. Hi Jeanie.
Hi.
Hi, Jeanie.
Hello. I'm sorry I can't be there. I'm actually this is the reality of making a film. I'm in the edit.
Oh, that's great. Can you see us where you are?
Yeah, just about.
Just about, okay, great. And you can definitely hear
Yes.
us okay.
Oh yeah, loud and clear.
Okay, great. Hi everyone, welcome to Glasgow Film Festival. I'm sure that a lot of you will have been at the other industry events that were earlier today. This one is called Making Independent Films in the Golden Age of Documentary. And I'm really delighted to be joined, both virtually and in person, by two wonderful documentary filmmakers, Paul Song and Jeanie Finlay. And we are going to have, a bit of a Q&A conversation about their filmmaking practices. We're going to be talking about things like documentary ethics, representation, filming styles, and how making independent feature documentaries is a bit different to factual entertainment. And we're going to have some time at the end for an audience Q&A as well. And my name is Katie Go. I should probably introduce myself. I am a film critic and a journalist based in Edinburgh and very happy to be here. Just to introduce Paul. Paul is a biracial British-Chinese filmmaker based in Edinburgh, Scotland, whose work focuses on people who challenge the status quo. His work has been broadcast on television and screened internationally, and his feature film credits include Dispossession and Polystyrene, I Am a Cliché, winner of BIFA 2021 Best Documentary, BIFA 2021 Raindance Discovery Award. He's a BAFTA Breakthrough 2022-2023 artist. So please welcome Paul, first of all.
Thank you.
And Jeanie Finlay is one of Britain's most distinctive documentary makers. She creates award-winning work for cinema and television, telling intimate stories to international audiences. She has made films for HBO, IFC, BBC, as well as 4 commissions for the acclaimed BBC Storyville Strand, including BIFA-nominated The Great Hip Hop Hoax and BIFA-winning Orion the Man He Would Be King. Whether inviting audiences to share the extraordinary journey of a British transgender man pregnant with his child, BIFA-nominated Seahorse, behind the scenes Teesside's last record shop in her hometown, Sound Out, or onto the set of the world's biggest television show, Emmy-nominated Game of Thrones, The Last Watch, all of Jeanie's films are made with the same steel and heart, sharing an empathetic approach to bringing overlooked and untold stories to the screen. She is currently making her 9th and 10th feature films. So please welcome Jeanie. A lot of acronyms to get through from their bios, and I think just that gives you a sort of a glance into how just acclaimed these two filmmakers are, and I'm just so excited to talk about their careers so far and sort of I guess the state of British documentary filmmaking. I was wondering if we could start with you, Paul. Maybe if you could give us just a bit of an insight into your sort of your journey. I'm really interested to know how you began making documentary films and how you sort of got your start.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't go to film school or anything like that, and I met this band called Sleaford Mods who was interviewing for a music website, and I'd never even picked up a camera, but for those of you who don't know their music, it's kind of a fusion of hip-hop and punk. And it's basically a guy sort of stands on stage and sort of rants about various things, the state of politics, disenfranchisement in society, that sort of thing. And then another guy stands there with a can of lager and just presses a button on a laptop. But it's much better than that sounds. Anyway, they were, when I met them, and Jason told me, the singer, told me about this tour they were going to do. And it was, sort of, this is 2014, and they were going to basically visit places around the country that are kind of sort of, sometimes forgotten, neglected. What would later turn out, interestingly enough, to be what people refer to as the Brexit heartland. So, in my head, I had this idea that following them on this journey where they would be, meeting their audience, which is generally sort of people who feel disenfranchised and, really fed up with politics. And I sort of saw it as a part, music documentary, part State of the Nation film. This was in the run-up to the 2015 general election. And the idea just wouldn't go away. And then this phrase, Invisible Britain, came into my head. And I found a filmmaker, someone that was at film school, and, we crowdfunded a budget. I think we raised about 14 grand, which, was a lot of money, but not really in film terms. And so we thought that was enough, went off and did it. And I guess from concept to it being in a cinema was 11 months, which is crazy. But I remember a quote from Andrew Weatherall, and he was talking about when he produced Primal Scream's album Screamadelica, and he'd never produced anything like that before. And he referred to Orson Welles, and he said that he had the confidence of ignorance. And I think that for people that don't go to film school and don't follow traditional routes into filmmaking, that can be a strength, because you don't necessarily know that you should do this or you should do that, and you make loads and loads of mistakes. But I sort of did that one, and then, you know, by the time I'd sort of done that film, I had a full-time job at the time, and they didn't renew my contract for some reason. And I sort of said to my wife, you know, what shall I do now then? And she said, well, why don't you go into filmmaking? And I said, well, you know, you don't just walk into filmmaking. And she said, well, you kind of have. And so then I made a film called Dispossession about the housing crisis, and then it went on from there. But I think it was, for me, the third film that I made, Polystyrene, I'm a Cliche, that I really learned and understood how to do this. The first two films were a bit like a film school, really. So, yeah, and then I moved up to Scotland, and I think, you know, without moving here, I probably wouldn't be making films, because moving here and being funded by Screen Scotland and, you know, some of the people I've met here have really boosted what I'm doing. So, yeah, that's my journey so far.
Yeah, great. And I think that we'll talk a little bit more about funding and your different films and things like that as we continue. Jeanie, I wanted to ask you the same question, sort of how did you get your start with documentary filmmaking?
Similar to Paul, I kind of fell into making documentaries. I was an artist, and I was doing a lot of sort of socially engaged practice, photographing people, and doing a lot of work that wasn't documentary, but it was with people. Like, I would ask, I don't know, 500 strangers to tell me about the love that they couldn't ever forget. And then I'd make artwork, scripts based on, like these strangers' love stories, programming them into bus stops, and a whole load of video art. And I ended up making an interactive documentary called Homemaker in Derbyshire and Tokyo. I ended up making that film because it became apparent to me that the conversations that I had with people while I was photographing them were the work. They were the thing that was the most interesting and the most sort of captivating for me. So I started to film them, and it was as instinctive as I picked up a camera and I started to have a go. I did like an artist residency at Hull Time-Based Arts, and I learned how to edit, and then I just taught myself. There was also, it's worth saying that there was an environment of independent filmmaking in Nottingham at the time, which meant that it felt possible. There was a lot of people making fiction work, you know, people like Shane Meadows and Chris Cook and Stephen Shield were just like making work and getting it out there, and I just sort of felt like, why not me? Why not me as well? Anyway, it resulted in me getting my first film. I made like one short, a 10-minute short, and then I got my first film commissioned. A film that had a beginning, a middle, and an end was commissioned when I was 6 months pregnant by the BBC, and they commissioned me to make a 60-minute film. And as soon as I'd made that, I just knew that this is what I wanted to do. No more rubbish art openings for me. I wanted to make films, because I've always been possessed and obsessed with telling stories of people that I would never meet in my everyday life. And I thought that there was a quiet power in that. I mean, you know, I've said it before, but I'm interested in shy people telling small stories quietly, because the act of lifting a camera or putting films on a television screen or into a cinema is an act of amplification. My camera can be a loudhailer, and that's really powerful. And so, I've just finished film number 9. I'm working on number 10 at the moment. And, you know, I've made so many mistakes, but I've also really loved the opportunity to, as I've learnt more, you know, built partnerships, done bigger films, been more ambitious, and really learnt my craft, I think.
Yeah, thank you for that insight. I think this might be a good place to play our first clip, which I believe is Jeanie from your film Seahorse, which maybe you can talk a little bit about after the clip plays, if that sounds okay.
Yeah, it's fine. It's worth saying this is the teaser for Seahorse, which I made back in 2019.
When I took the first vial of testosterone, quite quickly I was being read as male all the time. It's not about more male because more valid, it's just this is me.
He just said, I'm a boy and I want to be a boy, and I did think, oh my God, that means I won't have grandchildren from Freddy.
I've always wanted to have kids one day.
Not only women feel broody.
I'm going to have my own baby and I will be the dad.
I love being pregnant. Everyone should experience it, shouldn't they? Especially men.
Seriously, awful. If men had to go through this all the time, you'd just never hear the end of it. This is a film about me having a baby. But what I feel like I'm going through isn't me having a baby or pregnancy. It's like total loss of myself.
Having a wriggle again.
Oh,
so exciting. As a trans man, to carry your own child is a scary, daunting prospect. You just worry for your child, that you want them to be happy.
I just want to close my eyes and be on the other side of this.
Well done, Freddy. Well done.
Oh, God.
So yeah, that was a clip from Seahorse. And Jeanie, I'd be really curious if you could tell us a little bit about how you sort of, found Freddy and how you started filming and turning Freddy's story into a film. It's such a powerful, beautiful, intimate story, and I just love to hear a little bit about how it all came together.
Well, it's a bit of an unusual conception for me. Haha, it's a pregnancy joke. But Freddy asked me. Freddy met with lots of different directors, and I've only ever said yes to two people in my career. One is to Freddy McConnell, and one is to Game of Thrones. So usually I have an idea that I'm obsessed with, and then I go out and I find partners, or I get the funding, and I just make the film. But with Freddy was looking for a filmmaker that could be with him on his journey to having a baby. And he knew that he didn't want to do that himself. I'm not completely sure why he chose me. I'm glad that he did. It was incredibly challenging, I think is the diplomatic way of saying it. Because even in the best circumstances, Freddy sort of wanted to tell his story because he knew that there was a power in a trans person telling their story, and as Roger Ebert puts it, films can be an empathy machine, and I think we talked a lot about that at the beginning, and I think that the reason that he asked me to do it was because I just had loads of questions. It was an opportunity for me to think about what being pregnant meant for me. I felt like I had unfinished business. I wanted to sort of explore that. And I had lots of questions about whether his experience would be different or it would align with my experience as a cis woman. And so I just went in with a lot of questions, and I wanted to be with him as much as possible in tandem with his experience. So lean into observing stuff, and be someone who understood what was going on, and be that, I filmed the birth, which was an interesting sort of experience of sort of rolling consent. The film was very much made with Freddy, not just about him. And part of that was about being prepared to give it all away. So, it was very important that we were able to film in the hospital. The hospital said no initially. So I travelled down to the hospital with Andrea Cornwall, the producer from Grain Media, and we met with the PR team, and we met with all the midwives, and I took my camera with me and said, look, it's just me and this camera. And they went from a hard no to, okay, we're going to get our hair done if we're going to be on telly. And so then we toured the delivery suite, so I sort of knew what I was dealing with. But I had an agreement with Freddy in place that if at any point being on camera was interrupting with his human experience of giving birth, then I would leave, no questions asked. And it was that sort of commitment to understanding his needs is the thing that allowed me to stay. And filming the birth of his child was one of the most moving experiences of my life, because I was there when the child was conceived. Yeah, it's wild to watch the whole journey of a life being born. So I was trying to focus and like crying. And it's amazing.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. And I think that, yeah, people here have seen the film. They know how powerful that is as well, and what you captured. And I want to get on to talk a little bit about, I guess, ethics and your approach to different subjects and that sort of thing in a bit. But I think maybe this is a good opportunity to play the next clip, which is from Paul's film Little Warrior, and then we can talk a little bit about that after we run the clip.
El lugar donde vamos, que es la casa de mi abuela, donde yo jodí toda mi juventud, ese barrio es muy alegre. ¡Hey! ¡Hey!
Era la brocha.
¿Todo bien? Este era mi lado de manejar con caballo. Y estos cables siempre estaban aquí, rajados del nylon. Pero me montaba en una torre así como esa que está allá y sacaba mi papagayo igual. Y sin importar nada, pues, que se quedara el barrio sin luz. O sea, me importaba era mi diversión y mi momento de aquel entonces. ¿Cómo estás? Le marcaba la vida a la vieja loca que está ahí, que es chismosa. Ella era chismosa, que le decía a mi mamá y me daban una pela. Pero por eso te quiero, claro que te quiero por eso. Ya sabes, amigo. Ya, abuelita. Ese es eso de belleza. No carabota, su especialidad. Abuela, ¿cómo era yo cómo me portaba yo cuando era pequeña? ¿Qué hacía yo?
Primero, tú no hacías caso. Eran tremendos.
Travesura como siempre.
Te gustaba jugar su pelota, jugar papagayo. Ella, bueno, nació chiquitica. Lo único que se le veía era el pelero que tenía.
Y de ahí es que nació la palabra, tu sobrenombre Mona.
Sí.
Pero te acostumbraste a la mona que brinca y salta y...
Abuela, ¿cómo tú reaccionaste cuando yo empecé a vocear?
Bueno, mija, a mí en verdad no me gustó la idea.
A mí tampoco. Pero es su deporte, lo que le gusta y lo que tú vienes...
Hay que apoyar.
Hay que apoyarte de mi manera.
Mi objetivo era ir al profesional todo este tiempo, pero llegaron unos cambios que fue con la presidenta de la Federación Venezolana de Deporte, que me dijo que tengo posibilidad de meterme en una ruta olímpica y hacer un stop al profesional para ver si hay posibilidad de yo meterme en una ruta olímpica y después ir al profesional. Y bueno, yo sé que con una medalla de oro olímpica la vida nos cambiará muchísimo.
Just the extra, some audio there. Could you tell us a little bit about that film, Paul, and how it all sort of came together and how you found that story, or that story found you?
Yeah, so when was it? Probably 2.5 years ago. A friend of mine introduced me to a guy called Gary Young, who's a boxing trainer, and Gary and I met up and had a coffee, and Gary told me about Joanna. So Joanna is based in Venezuela and is the 12-time amateur Venezuelan boxing champion for her weight. And during the lockdown, Gary and Joanna just found each other online on Instagram, and Joanna just messaged him and said, "Will you be my trainer?" And he was like, "You're in Venezuela, I'm in Scotland. Like, how's this going to work?" And neither of them can speak one another's language. You know, Gary can't speak a word of Spanish, and Joanna can't speak very much English, but they communicate through WhatsApp and Google Translate, and he started to just train her online. And from there, you know, Gary told me about this story and would I be interested in, you know, making a film about it. And so we had a few Zooms with Joanna, and immediately you can see from that film that Joanna is just somebody who has an incredible charisma. Not only is she an amazing boxer, but she's just a star. And so we started to film this journey of those two, you know, for The Guardian. It was a short documentary that we're now making into a feature-length film. But essentially, it isn't a film about boxing. You know, boxing is the MacGuffin in the film. It's a film about Joanna trying to escape poverty in Venezuela. It's a film about somebody following their dreams. It's a film about the bond between a mother and a daughter. And I think those are the key ingredients in that story that I think draw me to it, and hopefully will draw an audience to it, because, you know, I'm not really a massive boxing fan. I don't really know too much about it, but boxing is the thing that's going to get Joanna, you know, to where she wants to be. So the story will, as it develops, I mean, that story kind of ends on Joanna making this decision to try and go to the Olympics. And fingers crossed, in a couple of weeks, we're going to Delhi to film Joanna in a tournament. We've already filmed her in Istanbul. And either Jo will go to the Olympics, which is, you know, one ending, or she will turn professional. She's been offered a contract in Scotland. I mean, the film started out, I gave it this terrible working title, which was Caracas to Caledonia, which is dreadful. But The Guardian really loved it. They were like, yeah, we really love that title. And it's like, no, we're not calling it that. We're calling it Little Warrior, which is Jo's nickname, Pequeña Guerrera in Spanish.
Yeah, great. I think that's quite interesting that for, you know, some of these films, you have been approached by your subjects in both your cases. And I'm always really curious about maybe it can be a little bit challenging or sticky if you, as the filmmaker, you have your own vision of how you want to represent someone's story, and maybe your subject has their own idea of how they want to be represented. And I was quite curious just about your experiences of that, and, you know, the challenges of making your own documentary, your own vision of your film, your own art, but also, you know, considering your subject as well, and the ethics of representing them in, I guess, a way that they feel respected and that as well. So Paul, do you have any sort of thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think, you know, Jeanie mentioned it earlier, it's that you make films, you know, with people rather than about them, and, you know, you involve them in the story. You get a sense of, you know, what they're comfortable, what they're uncomfortable doing. And there is that line between, you know, being respectful, but then sometimes pushing someone a little bit out of their comfort zone, but, you know, not crossing that line of what's ethical. I think, you know, we're making a film at the moment about Tish Murtha, who is a photographer who you may not have heard of, who documented inequality in the 80s, the effects of Thatcherism on her community in Newcastle. And we're making it with her daughter, and Jen, who's the producer, and I and Ella. You know, we're a team. I mean, I always work very collaboratively. I mean, as we all know, in documentary, the editor is just as important as the producer, the director, the participant. And I think you have arguments, you know, I mean, sometimes you talk about, you know, what you want to do. But I think if you explain why, and you can talk about it in terms of why you're putting something in or why you're not putting something in because it serves the story, then you know, you can get buy-in from the people that you work with.
Yeah, and Jeanie, do you want to come into this? And I was wondering about your experiences of, representing your own vision, but also your subject.
I guess you just have to try and be a good person. I don't know, I mean, it's my ambition is that the people I've made a film about recognise themselves at the end. And sometimes I sort of learned quite early that you can actually push things a little bit further. At the beginning, I think I was going for like a softer cut, and actually I think it's good that people recognise themselves for good or bad, so that you can sort of offer up a complex portrait rather than just something that is nicey, you know, because no one's here for a hagiography, and that's not why I'm making, you know, I want to make people laugh, I want them to question things, and I want to move people more than anything, and you only do that if you have sort of like full buy-in. And that means buy-in from the people who are in front of the camera, the people behind the camera, and also the people putting the money in. So everyone needs to be on the same page, really.
Yeah, for sure. I also wanted to break down this sort of the difference, I guess, between independent features and factual entertainment, which we talked about in the introduction, which I think that a lot of documentary filmmakers maybe move between a little bit, or they have experiences doing both. And I was just wondering, I guess, what do you see as the main difference between independent filmmaking, independent documentary filmmaking, and that factual entertainment? And I'm just curious about also your experience working with both. Paul, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I've not done any factual entertainment before, and that's not to disparage it, just no one's offered it to me. I suppose I would define it differently in terms of, I would see factual entertainment as somewhere between, something that is maybe a bit more journalistic, so not like news, but also not like documentary, which I think is, very much more story-driven than factual entertainment is. So, you would, when, for instance, if we're working on a documentary, there is an act structure like there is in a fiction film. So, you'd have plot points, you'd have an inciting incident, you'd have a midpoint, you'd have a climax, whereas I'm not sure factual entertainment exists in that space, which is not to say that it's not, worthy or entertaining, but isn't necessarily made in that way. That's just my take, though.
Yeah. What about you, Jeanie? What do you sort of see as the difference?
I guess one of the things, like I'm on the BIFA subset for documentary, as Paul is as well, and one of the things that we talk about with independent feature docs is, the way I think about it is, you could have factual entertainment, independent feature documentaries could play in a cinema, but they could also play on TV, and it never works the same way round. It's very rare that you could get like a TV doc could actually hold space in a cinema and be funded and live in that space comfortably, I think. I also think that there can be, I'm in a feature documentary, you've got the luxury of space and time to explore people's stories so that they can be fully rounded human beings. And in some factual entertainment, I think some people are just seen as, content delivery devices. There's quite there's a film out at the moment called Subject that is, I hosted a Q&A for that in Nottingham Broadway Cinema a couple of weeks ago, and that sort of really digs into the thorny issues of what it's like to be in a film. And I've certainly had conversations with people who want me to direct a film for them, where they simply see the people on screen as content delivery devices, and life's too short to participate in that sort of thing. It's fine for for the people who want to do that. If it's well paid, then good luck to you, but it's just not for me.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I wanted to move on now to The Last Watch, which is your great Game of Thrones documentary, Jeanie. I think maybe we can run a clip and then talk about that a little bit more in depth.
Shall I set the clip up?
Yes, that would be great. Thank you.
So it's worth just saying about the film. I wanted to make a film that you didn't need to have watched a frame of Game of Thrones, and I was embedded on the final season like a war reporter, I guess, making an observational film. And I was given enormous sort of latitude by HBO because I was dealing with all fiction people. They had no idea. They saw documentary as this sort of like weird witchcraft, and just let me wander around. I said to them, I need 4 months to wander around set and find my people, and I wanted to find just interesting people who could carry us through the final season. And I kept bumping into Vlad, the stuntman in the local shop, buying unsavoury snacks. Everyone was like trying to find decent food, and everyone ended up in this local spa. So I always used to bump into Vlad, and he was always like telling me a good poem, or he's a poet. He's like a poet from the former Czech Republic. And then he was a stuntman, and I was fascinated by the older stuntmen. What happens when you're an old stuntman and you're not Lee Majors? So so I started following Vlad, and so here's a little insight into his story. So this is clip 3.
Bam! Wow! Acting. And with the last one, you need to be already on your position. Bam! 2, 3, good. One head, Head, grab, pull, shove, big smash. Okay, good.
I love choreography. I like the process. You cannot be stuntman forever, but choreograph you can be forever. 33 years I'm stuntman, so I prepare the actor to be famous. I prepare them to look good in front of the camera, and I was shadow behind them. Nobody saw me. Now I'm in the front line, so I'm like, wow, what am I doing here? Why? Why me? I grew up in Czechoslovakia. After the revolution, many of my friends became part of the bad boy. I was 14, 15, and I had decision, go with them to be gangster or be with a live show. So, and I decided stay with the show. It was good because many of my friends are dead already. The mask completely changed you. If I stepping in the makeup trailer, joking, you know, and happy, and step by step, you're coming be in the dark side. Rauri, he called me and he asked me if I would like to be Night King. And I don't heard Night King, I heard just King. And I said, I can be any king, you know, don't worry. I think he's angry. He don't want to be Night King. The children of forest, they changed him. And now he's, okay, you want me to be Night King? Okay, now I kill you.
My name is Aberdolf Strongbeard. I have fought for Stannis Baratheon. I've also fought for Jon Snow. That's where I currently find myself, as part of Jon Snow's Stark army. I've been taking out the undead, you know, I mean, thinning them out before they actually reach Winterfell.
I forgot that we'd added Andy, who is the greatest extra of all time. He was. I wanted an extra who would be in like a crowd of 500 people, and you would always view the scene from his point of view. So the actors in Game of Thrones became the extras in my show. And obviously Vlad, the stuntman, becomes the biggest villain who was seen on billboards in 190 countries worldwide. But he's this like Czech poet. Just seemed really romantic and wonderful to me.
Yeah, it's such an interesting film, and one that I just absolutely love it, because it's, you know, behind the scenes glimpse into the biggest television show in the world, and it's also so much, you know, a Jeanie Finlay documentary about, you know, these very intimate stories and people. I mean, I think that it's Andy who meets Jon Snow at the end of the film, and you sort of, it's this really beautiful, moving moment, and you're sort of like almost in tears, and you're like, God, like I can't believe I'm almost crying.
I was like the crying emoji. It's like, oh, Andy got to. Jon Snow's wearing the jacket that Andy made for him.
I know, it's so beautiful, and I'm just curious about how this actually all came together. I mean, did HBO know what they were signing up for? Did you know what you were signing up for? How did you sort of,
oh God,
I guess, you know, how did this all come together, I suppose?
It was very weird. I got a phone call. I got an email from Alan Meyer, who's a producer in Ireland, saying HBO are going to contact you, so take the call. And so I was like, okay, you know. And, you know, since my films have got more well-known, particularly after I won a Biffa, I get approached with a lot of stuff, and my favourite word to say is no. Just because it's always like, do you want to make a film about some rubbish musician because they want to sell a load of stuff? And I'm like, life is too short. Anyway, I got this email from these people saying, we want to have a chat with you. So I Googled them, and it was HBO. It was Game of Thrones, and I was like, oh God. Like, I'd stopped watching it after about 2 episodes, because anything with a map at the beginning, I'm lost. I do not need to have to know geography to watch a program. Anyway, I sat my friend down, Eleanor, who works at Broadway, and just asked her, why do you love it? Because I know about fandom, and I know about desire and like falling in love with a TV show. So I just pitched. So I had this sort of phone call where I just said, I'd approach it like this. I'd look for, the story is about 7 families fighting for the Iron Throne. I'll just find 7 kings. I'll find 7 people from 7 different departments who are on a mission to get to the end of the show. And I'd made a film called Panto for Storyville, which is a Christmas film, a few years previously about the lowest budget pantomime in Nottingham. And that was like, can they do it on about 10p? And it became apparent to me very quickly once I started working on Game of Thrones, they were always going to get there, because it's a massively multi-million-dollar thing. So it wasn't like, are they going to get to the end? It was like, at what cost? And what does it mean to build a world? What does it mean to create King's Landing on a car park in Northern Ireland? And will people be able to flow a drone over the top and spy what's going on? And what does it mean to be Kit Harington when people are screaming your name outside the hotel in Seville? So basically, I got invited out to Los Angeles. I pitched the film, and I just pitched it how I would make it. And what was so weird was the more I was myself, the more they were into it. And Bernie watched Sound It Out. Bernie's the executive producer of Game of Thrones, and she said as soon as she watched Sound It Out, she knew that she'd got the person. And they just let me do what I want, pretty much.
Yeah, what a blessing.
So it was a joy. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, because I was making Seahorse at exactly the same time. So I would do a week in Northern Ireland on Game of Thrones. I'd have a team of 8 people, different DPs for different situations, and then I would go to the edit or go and film the birth.
Wow.
So it was really, really full on.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, a lot of similarities actually between both the films, though. Even though they seem quite different.
Same editor, same DP, same director.
Yeah. I could do like a double bill off both. Yeah.
Well, yeah, they're weirdly. I mean, I had this thing at Sheffield Doc Fest where, because they played both films, and I went out for dinner with Vlad the Night King and Freddy. We were at dinner together, surrounded by my boys. It was quite weird.
Thank you so much for that, Jeanie. Paul, I think we're going to play the 4th and last clip, which is from Irvine Welsh, if you want to set that up.
So this is a sizzle reel. So when you're making a documentary, before you've actually really got too far into it, you make these sizzle reels, and you can use footage that you've shot. Sometimes you can use stuff that's not yours, that you just get off the internet. Because you never release these things commercially, you can do what you want. So we made this one with the development funding that we got from Screen Scotland, and we've been using it to bring in other people to work with. So it isn't indicative of what the final film will be, but it gives you a little glimpse of Irvine and his life. It's a film that follows him for a year where he's really busy, and he starts out on this sort of journey at the beginning of the film thinking, he doesn't want to go gently into the night like Dylan Thomas wrote about it, but he's also aware that he's 64, he's coming to terms with mortality, and he's really, in his own words, saying, I think I've turned into that kind of writer that I used to hate, which was the writer at a book festival that'd be in the room working when he wanted to go out on the lash. And so the film is actuality. It's following Irvine around the world. It's going to start out with Irvine doing DMT at a drug treatment centre in Toronto, and that DMT trip, hallucinogenic drug, sort of sends him off on this odyssey within his own mind. We're going to be shooting some memory projections, so Irvine will be in like a warehouse in Leith, 4 projections on each wall. One will be clips from his films and stuff, his TV shows. One will be old photos of when he was a kid, when he had hair, that sort of stuff. The other one will be the encounters, the actuality of the film. And on the fourth one will be the times he lived through in archive, whether that's rave culture, the miners' strike, the poll tax riots. Irving will be in a white suit, he'll be wandering through, and he's literally walking through his memories, but you won't see any of that good stuff in the sizzle because we haven't shot it yet. But this is the sizzle anyway, and this was sort of made at the very start of it all.
A lot of my mates get really fucking upset if they think they're one of the characters, but they get even more upset if they think they're not in it.
Irving Welsh burst onto the literary scene in 1993.
This box just blazes with honesty.
It's real.
Doing loads of coke and kind of drinking tons.
Oh, my.
Wait a minute, now I remember it all.
I'm the kind of writer that has to be quite immersive, seeing things and talking to people.
Here comes trouble. Hey. I think you said something like, "You're the biggest fucking asshole I've ever worked with." I was quite chuffed at that.
Well, I'd say you and Lou Reed.
I'm obsessed with sport.
I find boxing very zen.
That level of focus definitely helped with the writing. I got into DJing and I was obsessed with the whole club culture. And it's all part of that weird 90s scene.
I'm getting a bit old now, but I've still got a couple of hours in me on the dance floor.
All the things we've done the last 20 years, it can do something really brilliant. I'm working on a novel, I'm working on a film project. The usual, lots of fucking shite going on all over the place.
Made up, mate. Made up. Fucking brilliant.
Hasta la vista, Taffy.
I think that every decade in your life, I think you've got to do more. You get old very quickly if you don't.
I've always wanted to create stuff, whether it was music or art. I wanted to express myself in some way. I want to try to push myself and challenge myself.
I've got the soul of a novelist. Oh, it's the funnest, most wonderful thing you can do. Just sit down and write a book. Well, I've been looking back, which is very strange for me, because I'm not a very reflective person. You've got to be a bit egotistical to write, because you've got to think that your story is worth telling. We're all striving to be the best version of ourselves. Let's get ready to smash fuck out of it.
I'm still curious about how this came together. Did you approach Irvine Welsh? Did Irvine Welsh approach you, or did someone bring you both together?
When I moved up to Scotland, and we've got some mutual friends in common, but we'd never met, Irvine and I, and we went to a concert. At the end of it was just me, him, and my wife, and we went for a drink. And there's an organisation, a charity in Edinburgh called Screen Education, who Irvine is the patron of, and Graham, who runs it, is a great guy. But supports Hearts. And as you may know, Irvine's a big Hibernian fan, but also supports West Ham, and West Ham is my London team. And Irvine was like, Fitzy's not going to turn you into a Jambo. You're going to become a Hibbie. And so he said, look, I'm not going to be there next week, but go and meet Jimmy the Hibbie outside the Iona, and they'll look after you. And so usually, Irvine's pals, a lot of whom are kind of characters that some of the train spotting people are based upon. They have to kind of babysit these, as they say, these wankers from London, and probably thought I was going to be one of them. But then they warmed to me and they adopted me, and I ended up getting a season ticket at Hibs, which is a bit of a punishment. But then Irvine and I sort of got to know one another, and we had a project at LS that sort of fell through, and we needed something else for the slate. And so I just said to Sarah, why don't we do a film about Irvine? Because Sarah's known Irvine since she was a kid. And so we met him for this lunch, and when you meet people and you're trying to sort of get them to agree to do something, we just tiptoeing around it. And Sarah was there, Marie and her husband John were there, who owned the company, and they all went out, to have a cigarette or something. And he just turned to me and he went, "Are we going to talk about this fucking film or not?" And so by the time that they'd come back, we'd basically agreed to do it and worked out the kind of conceit of it. And of all the people I've worked with, he's the easiest to work with. He's very laid back. He'll do anything. I mean, sometimes you're trying to push people to do things maybe they're a bit uncomfortable with, and it's the other way around. He wants to film all sorts of things that I ain't gonna do. But yeah, he's great to work with.
Oh, that's great. We're gonna open for audience questions in a second, but just before we do that, I wanted to ask both of you. what piece of advice, if you were starting out, if you were about to make your very first documentary, what piece of advice do you wish that someone who's maybe, you know, more experienced in the field had given you? What do you think would be something useful that you would like to tell, you know, emerging filmmakers? Jeanie, do you have anything?
I mean, I guess I just sort of tell people it's better to make films and go to film festivals and talk about making a film. You know, you don't want to be that person at the drinks with the long list of maybes. Just get on and make your film.
Yeah.
With us, if you can, with like, you know, if it means like making a film on a phone and learn from that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Paul, do you have anything?
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo that, and you know, the idea of waiting for, you know, this piece of equipment or, you know, this particular person, you know, do it yourself. But then if it was me personally, I think the bit of advice I would give myself would be find a producer, because the first two films I made I self-produced and, you know, didn't really know what I was doing. I've learned a lot more about that side now, which has stood me in good stead. But producers, you know, as directors are vital. I mean, a lot of people outside of our world don't really necessarily know what a producer does. But for me, the producer is not someone that's just there to do the budget and do the paperwork. You know, they are, you know, they're creatively, and all the producers I've been fortunate to work with have challenged me and have really, you know, asked me those tough questions and made me improve. And, you know, I wish I'd had that on the first two films, because they would undoubtedly been better and I would have probably had fewer grey hairs.
Yeah, that's great. I think we have a mic that is roving, so if you have a question, if you just put your hand up and then we will find you. There's one at the front.
Thank you. This is just a question for kind of both of you. In terms of, obviously, starting out, you have an idea of the documentary you want to make, but how many times does that actually go to plan? And how open do you have to be, and do you want to be, as the processes of filming is going ahead, to determine what the film ends up becoming?
I mean, I think usually, one thing I didn't know when I started out was that, you know, directors and producers have slates. So I was making this one film, and then by the end of it, I didn't, you know, have anything to go to. So I think now, knowing that and having sort of any number of projects, I think if you say you've got 7 projects throughout the course of any one time, and one of them usually ends up happening. And I always think a good barometer of whether you were meant to do it is, if it doesn't happen, are you heartbroken? And that's happened to me probably maybe once. When it didn't happen, I was, you know, really, you know, quite upset by it. But if you're not, you just move on, I think.
Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, I would say, you know, I probably have 3 or 4 films on the go at any one time, and usually while I'm editing one, I start filming the next one. And usually I'm completely open. I believe in the process. I think I trust the process. So I believe that the film will show you the way to make it, and you learn that by doing and then being present. And I don't mean that to sound hippie woo woo, but, you know, I sort of feel like if you listen to like, I don't write questions, and I don't go into filming with like a list of questions, because if I do, I mean, I rarely do interviews now, but if you go in with an expectation of what you're going to get already, then you're not listening. So yeah, I'm open to the process and go with the way it shows me. And I've got a pretty good hit rate in terms of there's only a few projects in the RIP folder.
Yeah, I actually have a question about I suppose money and funding and things like that. And, you know, has that changed over your career in terms of just financially making films? Because I think that, you know, people in the industry, we talk a lot about, like, you know, ideas and passion, but I guess money really is the thing that will make a film at the end of the day. Paul, I was just wondering.
Yeah, I mean, in the UK there is a paucity of documentary funding, and there are some really great people out there that are, you know, giving us funding, whether that's Screen Scotland, whether that's Doc Society, but there needs to be more. You know, the streaming platforms, what they're commissioning, you're basically told it's either true crime, you know, or it's got to be something with someone really, really famous in it. And, you know, I don't want to make true crime. I think it's, no offence to anyone that does, but I think it's just not a genre that I'm remotely interested in, and I don't want to make films about really, really famous people either, because I just don't think you ever get the freedom to tell the story, you know, that needs to be told. So it is a struggle, and, you know, usually you have to have like something on the side when you're starting out, whether that's teaching or working in a bar or something like that. But you know, you've got to dig in there, and as Jeanie says, you've got to find a way to make it. And rejection is the big thing that everyone experiences, and I put myself in a mind state where I make things in spite of being rejected. Someone else said this, that I can't remember who it was, but it was a filmmaker that said to me, like, I'm making this despite all those people that rejected me. And it was like, oh, I can see why you do that, but it's tough. It wasn't you, Jeanie, obviously, but you know, it's tough, isn't it?
Yeah, it can be. I mean, I'm a co-producer on almost all of my films, and I always put my production fee towards my next project because I'm constantly, you know, and I want to keep things moving. I've been an independent filmmaker that only makes my living from filmmaking for like a long time now. This, you know, I've earned this grey hair. It's here. You know, but also it's what, you know, development money is really hard to find, and that's what your production fee should be going towards. Usually, you know, traditionally you'd allow 10% of your budget to go on production fee, and it is used. I've just come back from a week's retreat in upstate New York because I was a recipient of one of the Chicken and Egg Filmmaker Awards, which are made to established filmmakers, and part of that is a cash. You know, we get $75,000 to develop our practice, and it provides some space to think about who we are as filmmakers and what we want to do next. And so I'm always trying to create space so I can really think about what I'm doing, because our time is valuable, and how you spend your minutes is how you spend your days, is how you spend your months. It's also worth saying that I've never lived in London. The London myth is a myth. I live in Nottingham. I'm based at a cinema. I've got a pretty sweet setup where, you know, I live in a city that's cheap to take a chance on, you know, and so I have been able to balance being a parent with having a creative career, because that felt really important to me, to my quality of life. And now as I'm older, I'm really grateful that I didn't run down to London and chase. You know, I've got an agent, and he sort of said, you know, if you move to London, do you imagine like the streets are paved with golden scripts? It's not a thing.
Yeah.
You know, it's rubbish.
Yeah.
You know, and if you're in Scotland, cling on to Screen Scotland. You are so lucky. There's a big fat zero here. You know, I'm looking to international finance to help further my films.
Yeah.
And Doc Society, you know, God bless Doc Society with their sort of, they've come in early on the feature I'm working on at the moment, and the feature I've just finished, they came in on that. But, you know, my co-financer on that was Field of Vision, which are a foundation based in New York. So I like to think of myself as a regional filmmaker with a view on the world, because my dreams are too big to be like chasing around London production offices looking for money.
Yeah.
It's too boring.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, that you don't need to move to, you know, London or LA or New York City to make a career in documentary. Does anyone have any other questions? You can put your hand up. Yes.
I suppose this is a question for both of you. So obviously documentary is unscripted and kind of unpredictable in what the situation may be. So how do you guys find in yourself trying to draw like a story and like a narrative out of the situation or the subject in a way that like engages the audience rather than just letting it happen?
I mean, obviously when you're filming mostly actuality, you know, I think you have in your head a rough idea of what the story is in terms of a theme. So, you know, and it's different if you're telling, you know, a story that's already happened, as it was the case with the polystyrene docs. We knew, you know, what happened in Polly's life. We knew what happened in Celeste's life. But it's really in the edit that it comes together. And it's a case of, I mean, for me now, which wasn't always the case, of having like a spreadsheet and having columns like, you know, this is what we're going to see, this is what we're going to hear, and this is what we want the audience to feel, because it's all about the audience. I mean, some filmmakers might say, you know, I make films for myself, and if anyone else likes it, that's great. That's not me. I make films for an audience. And I think very early on, if you know who that audience is, and if you think when we made Polly, you know, in my mind, I pictured that the first person that's going to buy a ticket, you know, for a cinema screening of Polly was going to be probably a woman, maybe in her 50s or 60s, an ex-punk, a feminist, and it then helps us be able to tell that story and know who we're making it for.
I think it's worth thinking about the edit process as the writing process. You know, fiction films are written ahead of time. Documentary is written in the edit, and I work incredibly collaboratively with editors. An editor I worked a lot with is Alice Powell, and quite often I'll start the edit early, so I'll be shooting. So like last year I did the 7-week shoot in the States, and she was getting sent rushes every day, so I'd get her to review a scene, and then, you know, we'd discuss like what else do we need to help tell this. But it's all storytelling, you know, it's not, things are happening, but you make choices about where you put the camera all the time, and that's really purposeful, I think. And I think about scenes as like a kite, who's holding the string, and that might be with sound. So like, for example, on The Last Watch, you've got a scene with 500 extras in, but you're seeing it firmly from the point of view of the person I've chosen. And I work with Miro a lot, so I create a lot of visual storyboards, and I share those with everyone on the team who's shooting, so they know exactly, like, these are the materials that I've chosen to tell this story, so it looks distinct. Yeah, so you line up your materials and your approach, you put your lens on to view the world, and that authorship is something that comes from awareness through shooting, but also through refining the storytelling in the moment of making the film.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. That's actually all we've got time for. So just say a huge thank you to Paul and Jeanie for sharing their insights. That was really inspiring. And actually, like, I've never wanted to make a documentary, but now I'm like, maybe I want to make a documentary. So thank you so much. Thank you to everyone working the tech here to get Jeanie into the room, and the front of house staff and Glasgow Film Festival. Go and check out all the other wonderful events that they have going on. But just please join me in thanking Paul and Jeanie.
And Katie.